Welcome to the What If It's Not Depression Vodcast. I'm your host, Dr. Achina Stein. And today we are going to be talking about stress and recovery from stress, not just stress by itself that can become quite stressful for some people. We're going to give you some tips today. And my guest is Dr. Doni Wilson, who is a naturopathic doctor located in New York. And she is a natural health expert, certified professional midwife, certified nutrition specialist, and author of Master Your Stress, Reset Your Health. She graduated from Bastyr University in 2000. She created her stress recovery protocol to solve her own migraines and her own health challenges. And that's true for a lot of people that I have been interviewing as of late. So for more than 22 years, though, she has helped thousands of patients overcome health challenges and achieve wellness by using specific strategies that address the whole body and ultimately resolve the underlying causes of distress. She loves teaching patients to know what they need to do to move from stress to thriving, living well, and do what they love with ease. Isn't that wonderful? She brings awareness to the impact of stress on our health. And a lot of times people really don't absorb that to the degree that they need to. It can be so impactful all by itself to cause serious chronic health issues. And she also gives us strategies and solutions for stress recovery through the media and at public and professional events. You can find articles about her techniques, her other resources, and she has her own podcast called How Humans Heal and her own self-care program at drdoni.com. Welcome, Dr. Doni.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, I am so eager to dive in. And I think it's really important for people to understand what it is that we're talking about sort of have a foundation, because some people don't even know what stress is. They hear the word and like they have these ideas about what it is, and they usually connote a bad connotation to stress, but believe it or not, stress can also be good for you too, right? You
Yes,
grow from stress, you change from stress. It's uncomfortable, but it can be a growing experience. So can you just give me what your definition is of stress?
definitely. And it's such a good point because I think now more than ever we're aware of stress that exists in our lives. I hear more often people saying I feel stressed, although some people might not even recognize they feel stressed. Some people are like, I don't feel stressed, I feel fine. And so what is it? What is this thing that we refer to as stress? And what I like to clarify is that sometimes it is a psycho-emotional stress, and to say that as humans we're gonna have stress. Like, it's I want to right away say that it's not about making stress the bad guy, like you're saying.
Right.
There's even good stress. There's stresses we may choose on purpose, like being a parent, or or having a career, or a business. These are things that are going to come with stress, but we may choose them on purpose. But there's also stresses that we don't choose, like maybe the death of a loved one, or a stressful relationship or job, or again, sometimes it's not just psycho-emotional stress. It could be, to me, could be stress from maybe not getting enough sleep, or eating too much sugar or other foods that are inflammatory to the body, or even being exposed to toxins, mold
Right.
toxins or other toxins. Basically, it's anything on our body that causes our body to have to adapt and respond, and maybe triggers a stress response in our bodies. And there's a lot of things that can trigger a stress response.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, but just to add to that, in some stress you want to use, I mean, just by working out, right? You're stressing your muscles to trigger a response in order for you to build the muscle. And same thing with your immune system. You want to challenge the immune system in order to make it stronger. So there are good stresses as well. And I
It's almost
agree.
about figuring out what's the right stress and the right amount of stress for you. And it's
Got it.
different for each of us, right? I mean, a lot of times I like this concept of hormesis, which is we want to experience a little bit of stress, like the example of exercise. We're using our muscles in order to create a stress so that we can build more muscle. But if we overdo it, if we do
Right.
too much, too intense, too long, now it's having the opposite effect. It's having a deteriorate or deleterious effect, I would say. Like where now the thing that we thought was good, the exercise, is becoming a stress that's working against us. And so I think a hard concept with stress is about how do we find that happy middle medium where it's the optimal amount of stress and the optimal amount of stress support. A lot of times it's easy for us to get more stress. That's abundant.
Right.
But it's hard for us to choose enough stress support to counterbalance it.
Right.
And so that's where I like to really help people focus is like,
Right.
okay, the stress is there. What am I going to do to help my body through it?
Right, right. Yeah. And it all comes down to awareness, which is really the first step of meditation, which is, foundational for addressing stress. But let's just move on a little bit more before we dive into that, because I'm sure you mentioned that down the line. How does stress affect us the same way, and how does it affect us differently?
Well, and I love this question because just to realize that even though we're all human and we all have stress, doesn't mean we experience it the same. We can all have not only just how it feels to us in terms of symptoms, right? One person under the same stress exposure, one person might be having high anxiety or depression or panic, and another person might be getting a stomach ache and bowel changes and you know what I mean. So it can show up different ways in different people in terms of symptoms, which is important to keep in mind. But because I've spent the past 22 years studying how stress affects us as individuals, I'm measuring cortisol levels throughout the day. Like I measure cortisol the morning, the middle of the day, the evening, the bedtime, and I measure adrenaline levels and I measure neurotransmitter levels because I want to see how is stress affecting us differently on a biochemical level, like even in terms of our hormones and our biochemistry. And what I see is that it definitely affects each of us individually. And this is important because the treatment's different. That means that we don't all need the same stress treatment protocol. We need it to be unique. How
Right.
does stress affect you so that we can treat it based on your specific pattern?
Right, right, right. So it sounds to me, you're telling me that it's really important to know your particular and unique stress type so that you can know what to do to feel better, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So can you talk more about stress types?
hmm So what with my research and my work clinically, because I see patients locally to where I am and around the world and measure these levels. And so then I looked at all the data and I said, what are the five most common stress type patterns?
Mhm.
As I said, we're unique and there's a lot of different ones, but here's the five most common have to do with the where the cortisol and adrenaline levels fall. Because here's
Mhm.
the thing, when say the alarm goes off and our stress response gets triggered, we know that all of us are going to tend to have adrenaline go up, right? It's adrenaline is the fight or flight, our blood is rushing, our mind is going to help protect us from the stress. So that's one thing that we know is going to be our kind of standard stress response. But what I'm referring to is, what does it look like over time when we're
Mhm.
under constant stresses through our life, or when really at whatever age? I do these tests on 8-year-olds and 80-year-olds.
Right, right,
Over time of being stressed, where does your cortisol and adrenaline end up? Because it doesn't, I mean, optimally, we want it to come back to the best levels, the most optimal levels for healthy functioning. But what ends up happening is when we're under constant stress, it doesn't go back to optimal. It gets stuck either too high cortisol, too high adrenaline, or too low cortisol or too low adrenaline. And it might be at different times a day. One person, it might be high cortisol, high adrenaline in the morning. Another
Mhm.
person, it might be high cortisol, high adrenaline at night. And
Right.
so this is the stress types. The stress types is where did your cortisol and adrenaline end up after your various stress exposures? And so, like for example, the stress magnet stress type has high cortisol, high adrenaline at some point during the day or all day,
Mhm.
whereas the night owl has high cortisol, high adrenaline in the evening, and it's keeping them awake, right? So
Mhm.
we want to. I did develop a quiz and an assessment that's in the book and online where you can do my stress assessment and stress type assessment to find your likely stress type. But then you might also want to measure your cortisol and adrenaline levels to really know what is
Mhm.
my cortisol and adrenaline up to,
Mhm.
because they have such an influence on our health.
Right. So what were the other 3 types? If you could just, to
Mhm.
be complete, to mention that here so people know what you're talking about, because you mentioned that there were 5, and now I'm curious about the other 3.
What are the other three? Okay, so the opposite of the stress magnet is the blonde blue, and the blonde blue has low cortisol, low adrenaline.
Mhm.
And then there's the other two. One is the sluggish and stressed. One is the tired and wired. Sluggish and stressed has high cortisol, low adrenaline, and the tired and wired has low cortisol, high adrenaline. And so it's actually possible to have the opposite. You can have, you know what I mean, one high and one low. And it's like, then people are like, well, how is that even possible? But it's just that our, it's just a matter of, I find that it's a combination of your genetics, because our genetics do influence how we respond to stress. It also influences our cortisol and adrenaline processing. And it's also dependent on your various stress exposures, like, so it's that unique. I think it's like as unique as our fingerprint. Like how does stress affect your body? And again, it's important because the treatment is different. To be successful about recovering, we need to know where you're starting from. If we want to go from point A to B,
Right.
we need to know where point A is in order to get to point B.
Right. So you mentioned some testing. So just to be a little bit more clear about that, you
Yeah.
mentioned cortisol and adrenaline. How are these tests done? Is it blood, urine, saliva?
Well, you can measure cortisol in blood. Like if you went to an endocrinologist, they could do a blood level of cortisol. It's just that then usually that's a single time of day,
Right.
and it's a kind of a broad range. So it's a good test if you're testing for, let's say, Cushing's disease or Addison's disease, where it's the extremes of imbalance. If the cortisol is way too high or way too low, okay, that test can be helpful. But if we want to know your stress type and how to help you recover from stress, we actually want to know your cortisol different times a day. So we measure it in either urine or saliva. So you could
Mhm.
spit in a tube or collect urine in the morning, the middle of the day, the evening, and the bedtime. So we can measure cortisol that way and see what your cortisol pattern is. It should be higher in the morning, gradually decreasing through the day, lowest in the evening.
Right.
And then adrenaline we can measure in urine. Adrenaline, also known as norepinephrine and epinephrine, we can measure in urine levels, so we can see what your levels are that way.
Right. Right. Great. Yeah. And do you see a difference in the testing for cortisol with saliva versus urine?
I
What do
don't
you see?
see
Is it no? No?
I don't see so much of a difference. I do both depending on sort of what's easier for the patient, and if we want to do other testing, like sometimes I'm measuring estrogen, progesterone in urine, and so then I'll measure cortisol that way. But I would say that I've found that it's pretty consistent either way to identify the person's cortisol pattern. Mhm.
Right, great. Yeah. So I know you have a protocol called the CARE protocol. It's very
Mhm.
similar to my protocol, and in terms of foundational work that most functional medicine practitioners have. I would love for you to talk about your CARE protocol and how that fits in or incorporates your stress type profile.
Mhm. Mhm.
Profile. Yeah.
The thing about care, and care, I use it as an acronym for clean eating. So about diet changes, what can we do with what we're eating, and how, the intervals of eating. How can help us recover from stress? That's the C.
Mhm.
And then A is adequate sleep.
Mhm.
R is recovery activities, all the different kind of, maybe what we think of as stress reducing, but I also think of them as recovering from stress. And E for exercise. And you're right, these are so foundational. Like, it's amazing. I mean, the research is very clear. There's a ton of research on all of these areas showing
Absolutely.
how we can use diet and sleep and recovery activities and exercise to help us with not just managing stress, but what I say is mastering stress, because I have a different goal. I mean, my goal is really, how do we get to a point where we can really be thriving even if we still have stress in our lives? I mean, we're still going to be parents, we're still going to have jobs, we're still going to have parents to take care of, so it's, how do we really thrive and not just function, but actually thrive? And
Right.
so,
There's a
so
word for that. There's a word for that. It's called resilience.
resilience.
Developing resilience.
Yeah, resilience, I love it. And it's like, we want to be able to like be exposed to stress and bounce back without it causing us to burn out and crash and burn and have 2 weeks or months to recover. We want to be able to be like, okay, even if I'm under stress, I have a big event or a big project, I know what to do to help myself through it. And that to me is resilience.
Mhm.
And so yeah, so we use the care. It's one thing to emphasize is that it's the things we do on a daily basis to help counterbalance the stress. We know the stress is there. What can we do to counterbalance it? Well, we can do our self-care.
Right.
And the thing is, especially in my new book, the Master Your Stress book, what I do is I went through all the research on these care activities, everything from diet to exercise and everything in between. And I looked at, how does the care differ for, say, a stress magnet type versus a blah and blue?
Mhm.
Because it then you can be even more specific, right? Like, so say if we talk about exercise, like someone who's a stress magnet and has high cortisol, they're going to need to be really careful that they don't over exercise and push their cortisol too much higher, right?
Right.
So we
Right.
need to like be really mindful of choosing maybe shorter amount, 15 or 30 minutes, and a time of day, maybe in the not in the morning for a stress magnet. If they already have high cortisol in the morning, maybe better for them to exercise later in the day, for example. Or like blah and blue that has low cortisol, maybe it's better for them to exercise in the morning because it's going to raise their cortisol a little bit and correct their morning cortisol curve. So it's like that. We can tweak our care based on our stress type to get even more benefit out of it. And so I'm really excited for people to try that out.
Right. No, that's excellent. So I would love for you to do a deeper dive in the stress recovery protocol that you have, and even talk about how this can affect your neurotransmitters too.
Hmm.
So we know that there is no such thing as a chemical imbalance. A lot of people think that depression is due to a chemical imbalance, or anxiety is due to a chemical imbalance, and that has been debunked many years ago. And so people, I want to re-educate people that neurotransmitter being imbalanced is really a result of lots of different things that we just talked about, and how
Yes.
they come together, and they might express themselves as an imbalance, but it's due to these dysfunctions in our life, and stress being one of them. So
Yeah,
yes, why don't you talk more about that?
I completely agree. It's true. A lot of times, we kind of have heard this term, oh, I have a chemical imbalance, as if it's like I don't know, set in stone or
Mhm.
nothing you can do about it. And to me, it's like, oh, there's so much we can do about it. That's the other piece of this, is like,
Right.
hey, if neurotransmitters get thrown out of balance by stress, which, like you're saying, they do.
Mhm.
Stress disrupts our cortisol levels, stress disrupts our digestion, stress disrupts our immune system,
Mhm.
our hormones, all the different hormones in the body, and it disrupts our neurotransmitters. So it's nothing to, you know what I mean? It's like, I think just validating
Mhm.
that, hey, stress disrupts our neurotransmitters like serotonin, GABA, dopamine. They're going to get disrupted by stress. So, what can we do about it is the key. And I also like to emphasize that these neurotransmitters, serotonin, GABA, for example, and dopamine, they're produced inside of our bodies. They don't require a chemical from the exterior to influence them. Our body knows how to make neurotransmitters and makes them all day long from amino acids, which come from protein in our diet, right? So, this is why consuming adequate protein, and not too much, but not too little. We need to consume adequate protein to get our amino acids so that our body can make these neurotransmitters, but we also need the nutrients as well, the nutrient cofactors. And we need a healthy digestion because a lot of these neurotransmitters are made in our digestion. I'm sure you cover a lot of this in your work. And so
Absolutely.
it's like not just in our brain. Like so much of the time we think, oh, these neurotransmitters are in the brain and we can't do anything about it. And it's
Mhm.
not true.
Right.
They're made in our bodies and we can do a lot about it. And so what I've done, I mean, this is because this was an interest of mine. Anxiety and depression and stress has been an interest of mine for over 20 years. So was actually the beginning of my interest into how stress affects us and how to recover, was to understand how to address neurotransmitter imbalances using something called amino acid therapy or targeted amino acid therapy. And it's to say that we can act if we know which neurotransmitters are low, we can give the specific precursor amino acid to help the body make more of whatever we have too little of or what got depleted by stress. And so I actually over the past couple decades, I've also been measuring serotonin levels and dopamine and GABA and so on in urine. And then I use specific amino acid therapy to help rebalance those levels. And it's been so rewarding to be able to see the difference for people and how much better they feel and how empowered they feel that they can actually use nutrition to to shift these levels. And what I learned through the process, because I was helping with what we were referring to before, by the way, with cortisol and adrenaline. Cortisol and adrenaline are made by the adrenal glands, which are above the kidneys, right? So when a person hears about their adrenal glands being affected by stress, maybe sometimes it's called adrenal fatigue or adrenal exhaustion. I call it adrenal distress
Mhm.
because what we know is that the adrenals have been distressed, and that's what disrupts the cortisol and adrenaline. And at the same time, the neurotransmitters have been disrupted and causing imbalance there. And so,
Right.
what I saw, and this is just over thousands of cases of helping people get these levels back to optimal, what I've seen is that we have to go through a process. We can't just, I don't recommend that people just dive in and start taking all different amino acids, or even if you think, oh, maybe I'm low on serotonin, and then just start taking 5-HTP. Like, I think we have to look at the whole picture, and then we need to go in a systematic way, because what can happen is, depending on your stress type and depending on your levels, if you go in all at once, it can become a stress to the body, just like we talked about. If we do anything too much too fast, now it's a stress for the body and you feel worse, and then you're like, oh, this didn't work for me, and you throw in the towel and you're like, all right, then I'm gonna go try to find something else. But I would say, before you give up so fast, it's more likely that we needed to do it in a systematic way. And so this is the stress recovery protocol. It has 3 phases on purpose.
Mhm.
The and the first phase is all about getting out of stress mode. Here's the thing: is like, if we're in this kind of survival mode, stress mode, cortisol and adrenaline are firing, our mind is spinning, our mood, when we're feeling it, right? We're
Right,
feeling this,
right.
what we call,
Absolutely. Yeah, your body needs to feel safe, and you have to be at rest in order to heal. So if you're stressed, your amygdala is firing all over the place, your executive branch is offline. You're not
yeah,
going to be able to settle your body down or even be able to think rationally if you're still stressed. So I completely agree with you that it's important to get out of stress mode and start putting a lot of these tools in place. And that's what I talk about, that in my programs, is putting stress reduction on the front burner from the get-go.
yes,
Right.
yes, we need the stress reduction and establishing that what I call care.
Hmm.
And what I do is I focus on, if the cortisol is too high or if the adrenaline's too high, we need to bring them down. We're going to bring, because if the cortisol or adrenaline is too high, that's just going to it's going to backfire. Everything else we do is going to backfire, because we have to address them first. So it's calming the cortisol and adrenaline and the stress response first.
Right.
That's all about this phase one.
Hmm.
And we, during that time, we can also support the calming neurotransmitters. So if GABA is low, we can support the GABA. Bring up the calming part. So it's bringing down what's overly stressed and bringing up what's too calm. What needs more calm.
Right.
And then phase two, now we can do a lot of rebalancing. Now we can do, much more of healing the gut and healing the imbalanced hormones if they're there, and all the rebalancing. Like if say adrenaline was too low for a certain person, now we can support their low adrenaline. We can't support low adrenaline when the person's in phase one. It just make it worse,
Right.
so we can support low adrenaline, then we can support low cortisol. If cortisol's too low, we also need to wait for phase two. And so then at by the time we're got everything rebalanced, we're out of stress mode, we've got everything that was too low back online again, then we move to phase three, which is what you and I were referring to as resilience. Like,
Mhm.
how do we maintain over time? Now that we have everything balanced, how do we keep it that way? And we really rely on the self-care then to help maintain our balance. But even if you're in phase three and a project comes along, and you're under stress, but now you also know how to help your body recover before it goes all the way back to stress mode again.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that comes down to habits, putting habits in place. And there are certain habits that are must do all the time, and others that you can be flexible about. So I think,
Mhm.
we really talk about a lot of the same things, is that the way to be resilient when you're stressed is to put habits in place, and to know your body, to know yourself, and to look for those signals where, uh-oh, I've reached this point. I need to do X, Y, and Z now, you know?
Yes, exactly. And I call it our self-care routine, like what is it we can do on a day-to-day that yeah, that and then we can modify it based on our stress type. Once you know
Mhm.
your stress type, then you know even more specifically, here's what herbs or nutrients I may need to take. Here's what, other activities I can choose at what time of day to choose them so that I can really dial in my recovery and resilience based on my body. Like it's
Right.
yes, a lot of these things, like you mentioned meditation before. I love meditation, and it's amazing for everyone. It can be very helpful. Sometimes people feel stressed about it because they're like, am I doing it right, and I can't do it for that long, or you know what I mean. We can get
Right.
stressed about anything, including meditation. But what my point is, like, we it's not one size fits all. Like, let's even look at how could you be meditating that best helps you in your situation.
Right. Yeah, so, it's really important to talk about all of the different tools. And I know most people know, I would hope
Mhm.
by now, that most people know that meditation and doing things like yoga and breathing are really, really important for stress reduction and management. Can you talk more about that? We talked a little bit about meditation, and what are some things other than
Mhm.
yoga and breathing that you implement with your clients?
Hmm. And in the book, there's a whole chapter on the R of care, which is these recovery activities. And I went through the research on all of them. It's so cool, actually, that there's so much research on these various different activities. And I look at it as, like, in the book, I present it like a menu, like go through and see what brings your curiosity. What maybe there's even things you're already doing that you didn't realize are helping you with your stress recovery day to day. I mean, even just taking your dog for a walk. But
Mhm.
now you could do it with more intention. You go, oh, instead of just, oh, I have to take the dog for a walk, I'm going to go, oh, I get to be in nature. I get to be
Mm.
moving. We know that interacting with our pets also increases our oxytocin level, and oxytocin is an anti stress hormone. So
Mhm.
it's like, and being in nature also supports your vagus nerve and your parasympathetic nervous system. So once you kind of learn, like, wow, these things that actually sometimes they seem so simple and just normal to us, but they actually are giving our brain and our nervous system very positive signals. I mean, as simple as taking a couple deep breaths. When we take a couple deep breaths, we're signaling the vagus nerve, which
Right.
is the longest nerve in our body that signals our parasympathetic, the
Right.
anti-stress nervous system. Isn't it so cool? We can talk to our vagus nerve on purpose just by taking a couple deep breaths, let alone, being out in nature, or, and many other things we can do to support the vagus nerve. It's singing,
Mhm.
humming, gargling, like there's so many things that we can support the vagus nerve. So I've been talking a lot about that lately because I feel like these are tools that if we implement even on a daily basis, like even for a couple minutes. What I've been trying to do, by the way, is I mean in the morning I always get up and go outside because I'm I take care of animals on my property, and so I'm feeding the birds, I'm feeding, and so I'm getting outside, I'm interacting in nature, interacting with animals, and then I'm singing because I
Mm,
feel like, hey, this is a chance for me to also give my vagus nerve some more parasympathetic messages, and then I can come in and I can do I usually do like a 10 or 15 minute core strengthening workout, because I've really learned from my body, it's better I can't overdo it, or else, because I'm a blah and blue stress type, if I overdo it, I'm going to be out for hours. So I need to go little spurts of time.
right.
And so, also, in terms of recovery activities, I mean, it can be anything from journaling is a great one, to
Mhm.
listening to music, to reading a book, to calling a friend or call your mom if you can. Like, there's so many things we can do that are just like, again, you might be doing it already and you didn't even realize, wow, this is actually helping my nervous system and my stress response systems reset. And to give us those things, I mean, a lot of times I say, like a marathon runner, we expect that they're going to need to take breaks and have days they're training and days they're not training, and they're going
Right,
to need to eat a certain way and to be able to be,
right.
doing their best performance. But what about us? We're doing a marathon every day of stuff,
Exactly,
and
exactly. Yeah,
we
you so
squeeze them
you
in.
you said a number of things that I want to comment on. I love the fact that you've mentioned that you need to reframe certain activities like, oh, I got to walk the dog. Oh, this is an opportunity for me to be outside, right? And
Yes,
to look at it as breaks and to look forward to these kinds of activities as a way to, oh, it's me time to take care of me. And so there's so many people who are running around like energizer bunnies and don't
yeah,
even realize that they're actually operating at that level, and that it is okay to stop and plug yourself in. You have to plug your phone in to recharge every single day. And I always say you need to plug yourself in somewhere on your bed, and de-stress for a period of time and recharge. It's important to include that. Just like you have to put gasoline in your car, we have to do that with so many things. We're not indestructible. And so sometimes people don't really put those two things together. But yeah, it's singing and finding all of these, there are all of these activities that I'm sure people have heard, but they probably don't realize. And I'm really glad that you have the research in your book, just how much it actually does something,
yes,
especially if you do it every day. That's the piece that probably they read it somewhere and it's like, I don't need to do that. That's not going to help. It's like, yes, it will help. It will actually do something if you do it consistently on a daily basis, give it time and space for you to actually recharge. And then when you're in that place on a regular basis, you actually start healing.
amazing,
Right?
amazing. And it's sometimes these subtleties. I mean, we're so used to thinking we have to push ourselves harder, right? Like we've been taught that you're
Mhm.
supposed to do more for longer, and we're supposed to be able to withstand that as if we're machines, and no, we're in human bodies that have a necessary stress response, but we also need our stress recovery in order to keep up with our lives. And yeah, just to be like, okay, how do I don't want this to be another thing on your to-do list. I want this to become your, what I in the book refer to as your self-care routine. How do we fine tune your routine so it becomes so natural to you, you wouldn't even imagine not doing these things?
Right. It's just like brushing your teeth.
Mhm.
Like that's part of your self-care routine. And, at least I hope. I hope. And you did mention something about calling your mother. Well, so some people find that stressful too, calling their
That's
mother.
true.
So calling someone who is safe
That's a
and
good
close to
point.
you.
It's a good point. I know. It's always like, yeah, they research that actually. They say, like they research that, especially when daughters call their moms, that it can help with their oxytocin levels. But yeah, there's some cases where that's not true. So you have to know your situation, of course, and yeah, call someone who you know is going to be helpful for your oxytocin. Yeah.
Oxytocin's their happy hormone, guys. So
Yeah. Like when you feel, your heart's warm and
right,
you sometimes you just you're laughing and or you just it's like a feel good,
right,
that we have these think about it, like who is in your life gives you that feeling. And if not, then you can also just watch a movie that you like that gives you that feeling, or bring a memory back, close your eyes and just think of a something that gave you that oxytocin feeling. Even if you can't call that person, maybe they no longer are here with you, but you can just bring them into your awareness, and we can trigger oxytocin just by doing just in our own awareness.
absolutely. That's a great point. Absolutely. Yeah, the power of belief is really, it's amazing. The power of belief in yourself, in
Mhm.
others who support you, in your future, just having that light
Mhm.
that you can follow, that's definitely you can see at the end of that tunnel. I think it's really important to have that perspective and have that in place for you to recover and heal. So thank you so much. I think we covered a lot. And if there's anything that you think my audience should know, that we haven't talked about, now is your time.
Uh,
And
Thank you. I mean, I'm thinking especially for depression. I mean, like, because a lot of times depression sort of gets, I don't know, put into a certain box or definition, and I really try to like look at it at a completely different angle. Like we know that both high cortisol and low cortisol are associated with depression. So we need to know for you what it is. It high cortisol, low cortisol? I
right,
mean, so much of the time we hear depressions about serotonin. It might be. Let's find out for you if serotonin's involved. But I see most cases it's not just serotonin. It's inflammation that could be coming from the digestion. It could be, other imbalances in other
right,
hormones. So just know that, like, especially if depression is the thing you're thinking of, like, we can use this stress recovery protocol to help with mood, however it's showing up for you. And a big piece of it, I love how you were just saying, is developing this self-compassion and self-love. Like, how do I, instead, because so much of the time we're in a battle with ourselves, we're in a battle with being angry at ourselves for having certain mood or having certain symptoms, and ultimately it's like, wait a minute, I'm stressing myself because I'm stressed about my situation.
right,
So in the book, I also guide you how to really take a bigger picture view and be like, how can I just be more understanding of my body and my nervous system and what it needs, so that it can be validated and it can be acknowledged. And from there, we can take steps to help it, coming from a place of caring about ourselves versus being at odds with ourselves, right?
right.
Because ultimately, otherwise we're just right, we're just still in a stress about our situation. And I want to help people to be empowered, that they can heal, they can address what caused this. Their change is possible. We know
Absolutely.
that.
And there's hope. Absolutely.
Mhm.
There's hope. And it is what you're saying is like you need to get out of your own way. And
Mhm.
so looking at those barriers, or what I call resistance,
Mhm.
noticing the resistance, noticing the barriers, and asking yourself, okay, what can I do to get over the barriers, remove the barriers? So conflict is a great way to notice, oh, that's a barrier. So how can I put myself in alignment with me and what my needs are,
Mhm.
and remove those barriers? And this is what you're talking about, is a journey. This is a
Mhm.
journey of life, and learning about yourself, and validating your experience, becoming more and more aware of yourself and your surroundings, and validating those emotions that come with that, coming to a place of acceptance, looking at your future. Right? These are all things that we discuss in my boot camp. I have a
I love it.
what if it's not depression boot camp, 12-week online program. And so a lot of the things that we're talking about today are addressed, looking for all of the root causes of your depression and
Mhm.
anxiety. So yeah, it's really there's multiple root causes, and it is finding all of them and having a plan for each one of them that's really important in order to get well. Yeah. Wonderful. So thank you so much for joining me today. I will direct people to your website, drdoni.com, and you're on Instagram and Facebook at Dr. Doni Wilson. That's the part that I remembered. Yeah, people, please go to her website and do her stress reset quiz to see what your stress type is. Okay, thank you so much. Take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.